About slavery, but few discuss paper genocide. We did not all come from Africa, and most of us have Aboriginal roots that were stripped away due to reclassification and miseducation. As a Native Black American and a member of the Muskogee Creek Nation, I understand the importance of tracing your lineage. If you want to learn how to trace your genealogy and apply for tribal citizenship, send an email to mike@keymediapro.com to schedule a consultation.
I am not a slave, I was born to slide, I am not afraid. Hop about the K, oh yeah, free to God, they went out of state. I'm a child of God, I do not belong to the United States. For Black History, tell Uncle Sam he can catch a fade. I went to hell, I mean school, graduated at the top of my class. Still never thought I was over my peers. We did that time together 12 years. Ain't that some movie? I think that it is. They won't control me, I'm really a member. I traveled that road, I came back with the jewels from. When I pull up, they pee how the roof gone. We some dog killers, want true bones. Know we all spit on, we supreme. Somewhere I read a nigga had a dream.
You don't have to try to be something you're not.
God, I can't stand this. Trying to be something I'm not? Trying to be proud of my African heritage? If that's being something I'm not, then fine.
My grandmother was a full-blooded Iroquois. My grandfather was a black from a long line of journeymen who lived in Connecticut since the establishment of the colonies. My father was a Bajan who came to this country a cabin boy in a merchant marina.
I know all of that, Mama.
Then know this. I am alive because of the blood of a people who never scraped or begged or apologized for what they were. They asked only one thing of this world: to be allowed to be. I gave you my grandmother's name, a woman who bore 9 children and educated them all. Who held off 6 white men with a shotgun when they tried to drag one of her sons off to jail for not knowing his place. And you had to reach into an African dictionary to find a name that would make you proud.
I was born black, I live black, and I'm gonna die probably because some cracker that knows I'm black better than you, nigga, is probably gonna put a bullet in the back of my head.
This is the remix. My father was raised in the era when black niggas couldn't claim Native American. Making music would've thought I had help, but the Indians I know wanna be the chief they self.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, smash the like button on the way in. Let me get some fists and feathers in the chat if you can hear me loud, crisp, and clear. And we'll go ahead and get this show on the road. Now, unless you've seen some of my previous content on Dane Calloway, you may not understand where this is coming from. So let me give you some context. Dane Calloway was one of the first people on YouTube promoting that Black Americans have Aboriginal heritage. I, like many of you, watched those videos, liked those videos, appreciated those videos. But they say, die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become a villain. And as of late, if we're just going to call a spade, our boy Dane Calloway is crashing out. Our boy Dane has gone full pseudo. Last week, I did a live stream about his weird asinine claims that Nat Turner never existed and the Virginia Historical Department created him up. He's a fictional character created just to take our land. Yeah, we watched his video in length. He cited 0 sources. He showed no evidence. It was just hearsay. It was just a nigga talking into a camera, spouting conspiracy. Now we're going to take the time out to fact check his other asinine claim, which is that Harriet Tubman is a fictional character created by an act of Congress and that they created her to scare us. Guys, already I'm fucking confused because I don't know how the story of Harriet Tubman is meant to scare Native Black Americans. Hey, here's a story about how somebody in your community worked tirelessly and risked life and limb to free slaves, even though she already had her freedom and she could have just lived a comfortable life. And instead she helped the Underground Railroad and freed hundreds and hundreds of people. How would that story scare us? If anything, that would embolden us. If anything, that's something to be prideful about. But Dane Calloway, with his pseudo conspiratorial clickbait, wants us to believe that Harriet Tubman is a fictional character and she was created to scare us. So without further ado, let's go ahead and see what this Negro's talking about.
You can recall how the story of slavery goes. A slave master is the owner of those he or she enslaved, and that a slave's daily duty was commonly rather known as a laborer for his or her owner or slave master. The truth is that a so-called slave master's position was literally the employer, no matter their hue of complexion, and the so-called slave's position was literally the employee. The majority of people today are at-will employees, and the contract that you sign in order to become employed by a company means that you can quit or be released from your job at will. But during so-called slavery times, these same contracts were binding for much longer periods of time. Once or if your contract expires, you were then released or freed from all duties.
No, Dane. Already we got to come through with some fact checking. What you're referring to is indentured servitude. There was a period in time where Europeans, as well as Indians, as well as few Africans, were not enslaved as we know at present day, but rather they were indentured. And at that point in time, it was just like you're describing, was more employment. It was more contractual for certain terms. And all that changed after Bacon's Rebellion post 1677. So, Dane, you're already leading our people astray here with the pseudo info because you're not giving proper context. Indentured servitude in the Americas, excuse me, not the Americas, in North America specifically, indentured servitude ended and race-based slavery began in 1677.
So, when you hear the story of a person escaping via the Underground Railroad, this was a person that was attempting to leave their job before the expiration of their binding contracts, if they had one. So, why was it an Underground Railroad? Because
no, you pseudo-historian, fraudulent ass imbecile. The Underground Railroad was active from 1780 to emancipation in 1863. We've already established that indentured servitude contractual obligations that he's talking about, anything that can even resemble something like an employer-employee relationship, that ended in 1677 after Bacon's Rebellion. If you don't believe me, look it up. Google Bacon's Rebellion. They literally invented the concept of race, black and white, lifelong race-based slavery. It was all because of Bacon's Rebellion, 1677. So why is Dane trying to convince us that it was just employees trying to escape their employer due to the or through the Underground Railroad, if the Underground Railroad started in 1780 and indentured servitude ended in 1677? You're not making any sense, Dane. Can you give us some dates, some sources, something, Dane, anything? Why would employees need to flee their employer through an Underground Railroad if it's just some simple little indentured servitude?
Because even the right of transit for a slave, or rather a fugitive, was denied if their contract was not completed. So what is the
but he's not showing us a source. He's not showing us a date, an act, a law, a diary, a journal submission. Nothing. We just got this Negro up here talking. All right. Meanwhile, I could literally pull up a chart of every single slave code from the 1600s to the early 1900s, but Dane can't show any sources of employees fleeing the Underground Railroad from their employer.
Underground Railroad. Upon the arrival of foreigners, they discovered a transportation system that ran both above and underground. This transportation system was previously designed to run from coast to coast, aligning parallel with the canals and rivers throughout North America. The expansiveness of these ancient railway structures was so great in numbers that it was very difficult for any foreigner to.
Dane Calloway, there is zero evidence of an ancient, literal underground railroad that runs from the East Coast to the West Coast. Can you provide us a year of when they allegedly built this nationwide, coast-to-coast underground railroad system? Interesting. We know when the railroad was established in America. We know because it changed the flow of migration. We know because it really helped them slaughter the rest of the natives over there towards the West Coast and the Southwestern Plains. But Dane wants us to believe that there was an ancient, literal underground railroad. Kind of like how you guys have heard the conspiracy that, like, modern day, there's huge underground highways that run coast from coast. They label that as a conspiracy, but that's actually factual. Our government really has shown some evidence to suggest they have huge underground highways going from, like, New York to California, vast underground highway systems. But Dane wants us to believe that they had that kind of stuff back in what, the 1700s?
Even attempt to regulate them all during this time period and even the days of so-called slavery. Now, you can get an idea of what these underground railroads looked like if you were to visit, say, your local train stations, for example. Upon close examination, you will notice that there are usually 2 to 3 sets of tracks, in which one set typically includes a left side track and a right side track.
Okay, got it, guys. Dane Calloway wants us to believe that that not only did Harriet Tubman never exist and she's a fictional character, but also that the Underground Railroad is a literal underground train railroad system, even though we see zero evidence of that present day. You guys know if that was actually true, that would be a huge tourist attraction. Do you know how many Black Americans annually would go take tours of the Underground Railroad, and they can give train rides? And look, this is the path that some of your ancestors. What are you talking about, Dane?
In more common use areas, only 2 sets out of a possible 3 are being used today, leaving one to wonder why one set of tracks are currently not in use.
Oh, shit. So there's 3 railroad tracks, but oftentimes only 2 are being used, which means we can ascertain that the 3rd track leads to an literal underground railroad system.
According to the routes that are displayed on the maps of the Underground Railroads, they directly correlate with the same routes of service that are still being used today, and even with some of the much older railway destinations that has since been removed, and also with portions of the railway system that ran deep underground. Now, I know what you're thinking. Everything is...
No. What I'm thinking is how much of a lazy, disingenuous bastard you are. Because if you're going to try to promote that the Underground Railroad was a literal underground railway system, that's cool. Present your findings. Give us facts, not opinion. But that's what the thumbnail should represent. That's what the title should represent. But no, he clickbaits the shit out of us, talking about Harriet Tubman is a fictional character created by an act of Congress. They created her to scare you. But really, when we click on the video, he's going into some conspiracy about how the Underground Railroad is an actual railroad underground. Oh, okay.
It's not a conspiracy. But not everything happens out of pure coincidence neither. A great amount of these much older and more narrow-like tracks ran through hundreds of different mines that led directly into a variety of mounds and mountains throughout the lands. and only the people that were familiar with these routes could conduct a method of transportation for others who are seeking freedom, or rather seeking to quit their jobs.
Oh, so our ancestors weren't enslaved against our will. They weren't raped and beaten and malnutritioned and no. They were just working a job and they wanted to leave their job, which is why they literally went beneath the earth to an underground railroad system. Guys, you do realize that when you just like take a step back and get rid of Dane's sensationalism and his dramatic effects and stuff, when you just like say it out loud, you realize how fucking stupid this sounds, right? You realize do you understand how much of a disservice Dane Calloway has now become? How much of a liability he has become to the Native Black American community? Because if you mention Dane Calloway, if you mention that you're a Black American and you have Aboriginal roots, and somehow they try to tie you to Dane Calloway, you're also being tied to this pseudo shit. Do you know how many people get turned off by the factual Aboriginal history Dane Calloway promotes because they just can't get past this weird pseudo shit about him saying Nat Turner and Harriet Tubman never existed? Do you understand how much of a disservice you do, Dane? At one point in time, you were an asset. Now you are a liability.
America's history's most famous trophy to use when it comes to campaigning the so-called slave story that was alleged to have occurred here in North America is none other than Harriet Tubman. In the year 1896, at a suffrage convention, or rather a voting convention for women's rights in New York, Harriet Tubman was allegedly quoted stating the following: I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger.
Okay. So the one time he does attempt to try to show us some evidence to support his claim, it's a quote taken out of context. So because she refers to her as a conductor, which is an appropriate analogy, it's a very, very appropriate analogy considering they're dubbing the escape routes as the Underground Railroad. So for her to use the adage of being a conductor of the underground, I mean, that makes perfect sense, but he thinks she's being literal and that she means she was a literal train operator. Oh, okay, guys. All right. This is so strange. Why is Dane Calloway crashing out like this? Why can't he renege on these claims? Why can't he at least just scrub that content off the internet? Just keep your factual Aboriginal content, but just get rid of this pseudo ass Nat Turner, Harriet Tubman never existed bullshit. Can you do that? Because again, we're just critiquing the information that we take issue with. No one's saying that any of his Native American, American Indian, Niji, Indigenous, Turtle Island, nobody's saying that stuff isn't true. I concur with a lot of it. But when it comes to Harriet Tubman never existed and Nat Turner is a figment of the imagination, even though he has living descendants, I mean, come on, you got to answer to this. Who's going to hold Dane Calloway accountable? And you know what? We actually do have someone who attempted to hold Dane Calloway accountable. Unfortunately, a lot of Dane Calloway's cult followers really dogged and ridiculed this man. But let's take a look at a very, very brave man that fact-checked Dane Calloway's video on Harriet Tubman never existing. But before we get there, I've got to urge you guys to check out the new website, nativeblackancestry.com. You guys can access my genealogy services over there, exclusive content, and much, much more. And when it comes to the genealogy services, if I'm ever going to promote a paid service such as that, I think that I owe it to my audience members for you guys to actually get a glimpse of what the service entails. So let's go ahead and hear a quick word from one of my recent clients.
If you're looking to get genealogy consultation, I highly recommend Mike. You know, he was very thorough, prompt, very knowledgeable. Even taught me some stuff about the background of Indian ancestry and heritage that I didn't know. The biggest piece of it is he taught me how to pull records and really dig into those records to make sure that I have things to match up to be able to take back for my citizenship. So I really appreciate everything he does, and I highly recommend Mike as your genealogist.
I really liked the information that I learned today, and it really opened up my mind. Before, I have to say that I was a little bit more closed-minded, and sadly, I didn't really understand a lot of the things about Native American history that my mom have been trying to tell me about the people in America. But this really opened my mind, and it also was really, really easy information to understand. Even though it was a lot of information, it was still very, very easy to understand. So I recommend, especially for the people with closed minds or the people who don't believe some things about ancestry and Native American history of Americans, many Americans in America, I really recommend that they give this a shot and look at this information, because I do believe that it's different and that you will learn a lot.
And you learn so much about history that they don't teach in schools. They're not actually Black, but they were Native Americans. But just because of how they looked, then they would reclassify them differently. Like first they were Native, and then they became mulatto, and then they were colored, and then they were Black, and then they were African first, then American. So it's like so many different classifications, and it sort of like keeps our true identity buried. But this, you learn how to put together your family tree. You are actually taught how to not just put together a family tree, but to connect your background with your Native heritage. And that's very important.
I'm Darius Spearman, and you're watching African Elements. It's time for another edition of Say What? This time we evaluate Dane Calloway's claim that Harriet Tubman is a fictional character and that the Underground Railroad has no correlation with the network of safe houses used to assist fugitive slaves, as historians have claimed. Rather, the Underground Railroad is an actual underground transit system.
And shout out to this guy, Darius. He did a lot of heavy lifting. I did my own expose about Dane's fraudulent claims that Nat Turner never existed. But when it comes to Harriet Tubman, although I'm not a Pan-African myself, shout out to this Pan-African dude, Darius, who actually did a very thorough fact check on Dane Calloway. Let's get into some actual receipts.
That had been in place for centuries. Is there any evidence at all to support this claim? Have historians been lying to you all along? Thank you for watching African Elements. In this series, we examine claims related to Black studies to determine where and why they fall short in meeting their burden of proof. Once again, a huge thanks to our Patreon subscribers for supporting this work.
Again, if this Pan-African professor dude, if he was up here trying to debate whether or not Black Americans are descendants of Aborigines or descendants of West African slaves, if he was trying to debate that, well, that's another story. Hold up, Playboy, I got some receipts for your ass. But that's not what he's fact-checking. He's up here fact-checking Dane Calloway's claim that Harriet Tubman never existed, that the Underground Railroad was an actual Underground Railroad. So let's get into it.
If you'd like to join them and get access to ad-free content and other materials for as little as $1 a month, click the link in the description below. So in this video, we're going to examine Dane Calloway's claim as it relates to Harriet Tubman. Just for clarity, Dane was pretty vague on what his claim was in the video, which made it hard to pin down the actual argument he was making. I had to go to his description to extract the specifics because I wanted to be careful not to misstate his argument. Even so, I've had to do some extrapolation from the video for the sake of intellectual honesty to try to discern exactly what he meant without strawmanning him. For example, what he claims in the description is that Harriet Tubman is a fictional person. Now, I could point out the numerous first-hand accounts that verified her existence, and even the documents that Dane himself produced in his own video that verified that she was in fact a real person, and I could end the video right here. It's clear from the context of the video, though, that what he means is not that she didn't exist, but that the accounts of her life as told by historians are fictional. Even that was difficult, though, because he didn't specifically state which aspects of her life were fictional.
So even if he gives Dane that benefit of the doubt, even if he gives him that cop out, and oh, Dane didn't really mean she never existed and that she's fictional, he just means that some of the stories told about her is fictional, he still is disingenuous and clickbaited the shit out of us. Because the title is Harriet Tubman is a fictional character created by an act of Congress. The thumbnail says they created her to scare you. So again, how does them maybe having some stories about her that aren't verified, like how does that scare us? How is that evidence that she's a fictional character? If he was being genuine as a content creator, his title would say, some stories about Harriet Tubman may be myths instead of facts. Not that Harriet Tubman is a fictional character. Words matter.
Rather, we have to extrapolate what specific claims he's taking issue with from the evidence that he gives. Also, with few exceptions, he doesn't specifically state who's putting forward the claims that he's arguing against. It's mostly a nameless, faceless they, or history claims such and such. As we'll see, not naming names allows him to create a hypothetical straw man. The irony here is that he had so many opportunities to make valid points about aspects of Harriet Tubman's story that historians have gotten wrong. Things that I myself have repeated in front of a classroom, and I've gotten wrong.
And yes, Bridget, the main reason someone clickbaits is just so they can get views. It's for monetary gain. It's for money. And his clickbaiting worked. This video where he put out the claim is 3 years old, has over 400,000 views. He's made thousands of dollars from this video. Yes, it's for the bag, being disingenuous, being misleading for profit.
Stick around after this video premiere for the live Q&A, where I'll get into one of the things that I've repeated for years about Harriet Tubman that I was just plain wrong about. The point here is that the methods and tools I use to find out that I was wrong are largely the same ones that I'm sharing here. And that's the point of this whole series. Hopefully, using these tools, you can have better confidence that the things you believe are actually true. Some of Dane's other claims that I'll be examining are: the recent news on the archaeological discovery of Harriet Tubman's father's house is false. The Underground Railroad is an actual underground transit system that's been in existence for centuries and has no correlation with the safe houses as historians have claimed. Why she truly has no siblings and why her name was changed, that's actually a claim that he never actually addressed, so we can just nix that one right here. Lastly, Dane claims that he knows the real reason Harriet Tubman was chosen to be on the $20 bill. So exciting. So let's start off with the first claim that the recent archaeological find of Harriet Tubman's house was false.
Now, when it comes to the life of Harriet Tubman, you might think all there is to know about her life has already been uncovered.
Right off the bat, we have what's called a Gish Gallop. In a Gish Gallop, an argument is constructed by throwing everything but the kitchen sink at the claim as evidence without any regard for strength or accuracy. It's a common tactic used to make evidence seem overwhelming, but it actually isn't. In this case, we're presented with a cascade of weak evidence, and then we're presented with the conclusion. When we look at each piece of evidence individually, though, what it all amounts to is, well,
that is one big pile of shit.
So let's look at the evidence. I'll spare you the details while summarizing his key points as honestly as I can. For anybody who believes I'm leaving out some crucial bit of evidence and would like to call me out on that, I've left a link to the original video in the description. I'd be happy to have a conversation in the comments on why the things I'm skipping over isn't evidence. So, without boring you all to tears, here are the points in that Gish Gallop that he does emphasize.
Well, we know that in 1836, Anthony Thompson's will, and he was the person who enslaved Ben Ross, he put in there that, and 5 years from his death, that Ben would be manumitted, freed, and be given 10 acres. Not only the will, but also some land deeds over time began to mention Old Ben's place.
When she showed us the fragments of some of the plates, when she showed us the fragments of some of the plates,
So each artifact has a story, it has an object it's linked with, and the more we excavate, the more we find, the more we can really reconstruct how Ben Ross lived there in the marshlands.
Okay, and here is his conclusion, if you can call it that. How can you reconstruct how Ben Ross lived there if you only have old pieces of glass, rocks, and a coin from 1808? This is what's called an argument from incredulity, or concluding that because you can't or refuse to believe something, it must not be true. In order to demonstrate something is false, you have to actually provide evidence that it's false. The fact that you find something incredible or improbable isn't evidence of anything. Aside from that, we have some land deeds that mention old Ben's place that he never even bothers to directly address, and this is our overwhelming evidence. Next, we have another Gish Gallop, presumably to make the case as to why Tubman was chosen to be on the $20 bill. It's just a couple of news stories with nothing emphasized. I'm not quite sure why it's there, since at no point does he say, aha, this proves something. It's just there for no apparent reason. He just inserts the clips unedited with no emphasis on anything, and then just ends with this mic drop. Now, even there's something I need to point out. I have to apologize in advance. This may sound petty and nitpicky, but it just bugs me. This is a bald eagle. This is the sound a bald eagle makes. However, the sound paired with this eagle is not a bald eagle, but actually a hawk, most likely a red-tailed hawk.
Damn, Dane can't even get the bird noise right. No, we being petty now. We definitely being petty now.
Like this one. Yes, I know this has nothing to do with the argument, but it's just a pet peeve of mine and it bugs me. Anyway, onward. Next, we come to his most bizarre claim. The Underground Railroad is an actual underground transit system that's been in existence for centuries and has no correlation with the safe houses as history so loves to claim. Again, I'll give you the Cliff's Notes version and do my best to extract the specific points that he seems to think are evidence. What it amounts to, though, is just a series of claims with no evidence whatsoever. For example, he claims without evidence that slaves escaping via the Underground Railroad were actually employees trying to free themselves of their jobs through a literal railroad that existed underground. And the reason it was underground is that fugitives were unable to travel via transit. He shows photos of people in underground mines and railway tunnels, claiming with no evidence whatsoever that these were part of an ancient underground network of railways.
Did anybody else notice that when we watched the video unedited from Dane's own channel in the beginning of this live stream? He really didn't give any evidence for this vast underground ancient network, literal underground railway. He just showed like a few pictures of mines and tunnels and like, all right.
Ways. Now, I'm sure Dane's fanboys are going to blow up the comments section claiming I skipped over all the evidence he presented. Again, if you'd like to specify below what crucial bit of evidence I skipped, I'm happy to have that conversation and explain why it's not evidence. He ends this section with what's called contextomy, often referred to as quote mining.
In the year 1896, at a suffrage convention, or rather a voting convention for women's rights in New York, Harriet Tubman was allegedly quoted stating the following: "I was the conductor of the Underground Railroad for 8 years, and I can say what most conductors can't say. I never ran my train off the track, and I never lost a passenger." End quote. What's very interesting to note about this quote is that she indicated to the public what her job's description and position was for 8 years with the Underground Railroad. Harriet Tubman acknowledged that she was literally a train conductor, in which a train conductor is responsible for the overall operations of rail systems and safety measures for its oncoming passengers. So in this quote, which was said to have been stated by Harriet Tubman directly, she admits to performing her duties without error, while also indicating that she cannot say the same for other conductors of the Underground Railroad.
It's a fallacy that removes a quote or passage from its context in order to distort its meaning. You can also call this a cherry-picking fallacy, where very selective evidence is presented while ignoring stronger or inconvenient evidence. For example, there are other quotes where Harriet Tubman specifically mentions the North Star, whereas trains don't generally use stars to navigate. I went with quote mining, though, in order to highlight the historical context. Particularly from the 1850s onward, after the passage of the Fugitive Slave Act, slave rescuing was an extraordinarily dangerous occupation. The need for secrecy was paramount, and because of that, railroad terminology was used along with an entire set of code words to avoid speaking overtly about slave rescuing. That's also true more broadly in Black culture, as we see lots of coded language in everyday vernacular. I addressed that in a separate video as it relates to Black music, for example, so if you'd like to check that out, the link is in the description. So, metaphorical coded language became a part of the vernacular, and there's no reason to believe that she wasn't speaking metaphorically in this cherry-picked quote. Contrary to the claim, Harriet Tubman did not say the word literally when referring to herself as a train conductor.
So, the question remains, how was Harriet Tubman cognizant of the routes ranging from southern to northern parts of these lands and all the way to Canada, with her being an alleged runaway slave?
Here we have what can generously be called a straw man fallacy. I say generously because a straw man fallacy consists of substituting an argument with a distorted, exaggerated, or misrepresented version of the argument. No historian who understands the Underground Railroad would claim that Harriet Tubman was cognizant of the routes from the South all the way to Canada. That's not how the Underground Railroad worked. The Underground Railroad operated as a network in which each agent played his or her specific role. Tubman's role as conductor was to guide slaves from the eastern shore of Maryland, where she escaped, to one of the safe houses in the free state of Pennsylvania. From there, runaway slaves would continue along the network.
Nah, I don't know, Danger. I think Dane Calloway thinks that Harriet Tubman was literally underground in a mine somewhere using one of those yabba dabba doo Flintstone trains where you got like a big lever and there's like one person on each side and you're just cranking this big lever up and down on some Scooby-Doo shit. Like,
to the next safe house. So, is Dane purposely misrepresenting our historical understanding of the Underground Railroad? Or is he just plain ignorant of what historians actually say about it? I'll let you decide.
And how is it that Harriet Tubman hinted that it was more than one conductor of the Underground Railroad, but she was the only one chosen to be duly noted by American history? Who are the others?
Here we have another straw man fallacy, and this one's just embarrassing. Again, Dane's either purposely misrepresenting the history or simply not aware of the long list of conductors and operators on the Underground Railroad. The list includes folks like William Still, who's often referred to as the father of the Underground Railroad, to Mary Ellen Pleasant, to many, many others. From there, we go on another Gish Gallop about the preservation of historic sites through Act of Congress, and yet another Gish Gallop.
and for any of you Dane Calloway cult followers who are going to be in my comment section talking about, well, Mike, why don't you debate Dane? Mike, why don't you debate Dane? All of my live streams have a live call-in button. Anybody can click the link and call in at any point in time. So pull up, for one. For two, I'm never going to waste my time debating whether or not Harriet Tubman or Nat Turner ever existed. That's a terrible use of my time. Anybody who actually believes for a second that Nat Turner and Harriet Tubman never existed and that somehow it was in white people's best interest to concoct those stories out of thin air, you're a lost cause. You're part of that, Moorish sovereign citizen, Hebrew Israelite, overstand, understand. White people were created by the big-headed alien Yaqub in the Caucasus Mountains. You're part of that pseudo demographic. And I don't deal with the pseudo.
On why the story changes every year, which is another series of claims with no evidence. Finally, we get to another one of his actual claims. Why was Harriet Tubman chosen to be on the $20 bill? For me, this is the most interesting part of the video, as it does actually contain some little-known aspects of Harriet Tubman's history. It just ends on a weird but predictable note that you might have noticed throughout this video. He goes on another kind of Gish Gallop here, but long story short, Harriet Tubman initially received a monthly pension of $5 for her service in the Civil War. Her husband, who had also served in the Civil War, died, and that prompted a drawn-out process where Tubman tried to obtain an additional pension for her late husband as a survivor. In the end, after some back and forth, her pension
let me get some feedback, chat, whether the audio just got distorted for you as well.
was raised to $20 a month.
They were adamant about attempting to get her pension raised to $25 per month, but was denied by the Committee of Pensions. And then it was later ruled that Harriet would receive a pension of exactly $20 per month. Does this have something to do with wanting her face on a $20 bill?
That's an interesting question. The weird part is that it's presented as if he's uncovered some conspiracy. If Dane really wanted an answer to this question, I'm sure he could just reach out to the Treasury Department or the White House press secretary and ask. But this brings up another common tactic for people who argue dishonestly: just asking questions. I'm sure you've noticed this throughout this video, and it's a tactic commonly used among conspiracy theorists, where a statement masquerades as a question. Framing it as a question protects the one asking the question from accusations of false claims. When called out on it, usually the person engaging this type of fallacy will take a step back and say, "Hey, I'm just asking questions." The fallacy here is that by
kind of like how Dane always retorts to, "I'm just here to make you think. You know, I'm also disrespecting our ancestors and saying they never existed, but I'm just here to make you think." All right. All right. Is there a lot of great factual content that Dane Calloway has produced? Yes. As of late, I don't see none of it. I see pseudo shit mixed with Trump Republican Party dick riding. And I've got no party affiliation. It's just weird that if your channel is about Black indigeneity, that you're getting so political and right wing and so conspiratorial. I mean, it seems like you're just desperate for clicks.
just asking questions, the person's actually shifting the burden of proof. The burden of proof is on the person making the claim. So if you notice somebody in a discussion effectively making claims by way of rhetorical questions, do call them out on it by saying something like, "If you're going to make a claim, don't ask me questions. It's on you to provide evidence for your claim." The rest is just another Gish Gallop with no connection to any specific claim. So to recap, we have a series of several logical fallacies that include the Gish Gallop, argument from incredulity, contextomy or quote mining, straw man, and shifting the burden of proof. These are some of the things to watch out for when examining extraordinary claims. If you see stuff like this popping up in your conversations, do politely call it out. Oftentimes that'll lead to a more intellectually honest and engaging discussion. Worst case scenario, if they persist, you'll know straight away that you're wasting your time in attempting to have a productive conversation with that individual. There's a lot more interesting stuff here to unpack, so be sure to check out the live Q&A immediately following this premiere if you'd like to continue the conversation. Otherwise, I'm Darius Spearman. Thank you for watching.
The first time ever since obviously being on YouTube for over 5 years, I have ever booked a session, and man, I'm glad that it was with you, Mike. And I look forward to being one of your testimonials of I'm going down this journey, so my family can start to get a sense of who really we are, and not just leave it as stories out there floating, but really get to the weeds of things. And I can do better, and I can teach my daughter exactly, not from her mom's side, but from her father's side, what your bloodline really is, and be proud of that. I thank you for that, Mike.
Wants to know, Mike is the real deal. His information is real. He's a humble brother, and he's all about the information. He's not about, personal gain or personal applause, personal credit. This is about our nation. It's not about one individual, but it's about us collectively as a people. And Mike is all about that, So we stand behind the brother 100%.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we can agree to disagree, but I want to know what you think. So make sure to leave a comment in the comment section. Do you agree with Dane Calloway that Harriet Tubman never existed, that her and Nat Turner are fictional characters, that Harriet Tubman was created to scare us, and that Nat Turner was created to take our land? Let me know what you think. Boy, oh boy. This is an interesting time we live in. For all the arguments you could try to make, for all the things to try, I mean, what? There's so much actual hidden history. There's so much actual miseducation that needs to be rectified that we can't let people like this run amok peddling the pseudo shit. But I'll see you guys next time. Stay vigilant.
They don't want you to remember this. You not no slave, you indigenous. Fuck how they painted them Indians. You went to war with the French and the British men. Quite frankly, you was kings, Merovingians. They took the women and men, made them prisoners. Raised up the children to worship their images. Set up a lab to the genes and they mixed them. And this shit get way deeper than your pigment.